afternoon, I'm Robin Sherbatsky.
And I'm Lily Aldrin.
Reporting live from Metro News 1 headquarters. Today is a special segment in which we will be discussing the women's suffrage movement from 1900 to 1919.
To begin our segment, let's give a little bit of background. First, to clarify, the word suffrage by definition means the right or privilege to vote. When the Constitution was established in 1787, it gave states the power to create voting qualifications.
The majority of states restricted voting for only those who own land or a considerable amount of taxable property, which ultimately excluded people of color and women.
At the time, women had very few rights and began to state the resemblance between their social and political lives to that of a slave.
This comparison garnered much support from men and women, which eventually led to the establishment of the women's suffrage movement.
During the 1900s, many temperance groups and women's social welfare movements successfully helped push for women's suffrage.
Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were two of the most important leaders of the women's suffrage movement that unfortunately were unable to see women gain the right to vote.
In 1900, Susan B. Anthony resigned as the president of the National American Suffrage Association and was succeeded by Carrie Chapman Catt.
With our advanced technology, we are able to travel back in time and actually get an interview with Carrie Chapman Catt and other important women reformers. Take a look at this.
Traveled back in time, and I am here with Carrie Chapman Catt. Now tell us, what are you most passionate about?
Well, I strongly believe that men and women should have an equal participation in politics. Allowing women to participate in politics will give them a voice.
Yes, and how are you putting your ideas into motion?
Well, I'm president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. We fund conventions where we meet with many other suffragists to create campaigns for women's suffrage. During my term, I actually increased the membership in my organization and also conducted many fundraisers that consequently benefited in the push for suffrage.
Yes, that's incredible. Can you tell us about your winning plan?
Yes, of course. I introduced a strategy involving two approaches. One is fighting for state law and continuing state campaigning and gaining at least partial suffrage statewide. And then two, due to gaining the partial suffrage in the states, that will put pressure on the Constitution to ratify the 19th Amendment. And in order to achieve this, I established the organization committee to conduct the state campaigning effectively. And in 1970, we actually gained suffrage in New York, which garnered much support that led us to gaining the vote in 1920.
That is fascinating. You truly were a vital leader of the women's suffrage movement. Now, can you tell us, did you write any books?
Yes, I actually did. I have a copy right here. It's called Women's Suffrage and Politics, and I depict the struggles we as women face in gaining the right to vote. I have a little excerpt I want to share with you guys. So it goes, just as World War is no white man's war, but every man's war, so is the struggle for women's suffrage. No white woman's struggle, but every woman's struggle.
You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Back to you, Robin.
That was amazing. Now let's not forget that World War I also greatly affected the women's suffrage movement. Before the war, women were homemakers, but since men had to go to war, women would take over many male-dominated jobs.
Many women became farmers, factory workers, nurses, policewomen, and worked in public transportation.
During this time, women participation in economy allowed suffragists to become more aggressive in their beliefs, developing into a stronger basis of support for labor unions, reform movements, and temperance organizations, which all helped push for the 19th Amendment.
Alright, now let's talk to Alice Paul, another vital leader in the women's suffrage movement. So Alice, what was your vision on equality for men and women?
Well, I dedicated my whole life to women's rights to push for the 19th Amendment, and in 1913 I organized a suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. when Woodrow Wilson got inaugurated.
Interesting. Now please tell us more about the Congressional Union.
I actually co-founded the Congressional Union with Lucy Burns, and we campaigned for a constitutional amendment that would guarantee women's suffrage. So it was a new way to gain momentum for the women's suffrage movement, and we were famous for picketing the White House, which resulted in many arrests. So the purpose of the Congressional Union is for our voices to be heard in hopes to ratify the 19th Amendment.
Thank you so much for allowing us to interview you. Back to you, Robin.
Now let's talk to Mary Church Terrell.
Mary, I heard about your nonprofit organization called the National Association of Colored Women's Club. Can you elaborate on this?
Yes, well, the main goal of the National Association of Colored Women's Club was to advocate for a wide range of improvements of the lives of women of color. So as president of this organization, I feel very passionate to speak out about this issue. And in fact, I also helped bring down segregated restaurants in Washington, D.C. when I was rejected service.
Since you're very passionate about this topic, did you write any books about it?
Yes, I did write a book. It's called A Colored Woman in a White World. And in this book, I explain the important events and people in my life that helped me become the first Black woman appointed to the District of Columbia Board of Education and the American Association of the University of Women.
Carrie Chapman Catt, Alice Paul, and Mary Church Terrell were vital leaders of the women's suffrage movement during World War I that helped push for the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920.
Without them, and many other women reformers, the ratification of the 19th Amendment wouldn't have been passed, and life today for women would be different.
I'm Lily Aldrin.
And I'm Robin Sherbatsky.
Thank you for joining us on this segment about women's suffrage movement during World War I.